Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso. And we're coming up to the end of 2019, it's the end of the decade, and normally this is the time where most YouTube channels would make sort of like an end of the year episode talking about the best watches of the year. But 2019 is a special year because it celebrates the 50th anniversary of what in my opinion is the most important year for the chronograph. So instead of just focusing on the best watches of this year, I'm focusing specifically on the best anniversary watches celebrating this important time in the history of watches. So starting off, of course, we need to start with Omega because this is the 50th anniversary of the Moonwatch, of the moon landing in 1969. And obviously, Omega celebrates the moon landing every chance they get, whether it's the 50th anniversary or not. But this year, they really did pull out all the stops with 3 really important limited editions. So the first 2 anniversary models that they brought out to celebrate the Moonwatch was one version that was in Moonshine gold, which is their new alloy that's sort of a paler version of gold, so it looks more like a vintage watch. And also they came out with a stainless steel model that used the 50s and 60s style bracelet as well, with Moonshine gold accents on the dial as well as a Moonshine gold bezel. But the gold wasn't the real highlight between these two. The big highlight between these two was the movement. The Calibre 3861 represents a complete evolution of the 1861 movement that the Moonwatch has been using for the last 50 years. And in my video that I made about the Speedmaster, I talked about how the Moonwatch, the Speedmaster Professional that you can buy today, on the inside, it's pretty much the same as it was. They haven't done any evolutions on the movement itself, really. This completely throws out the window because what they've done is they've still kept what is essentially the 1861 movement, but they brought it into the 21st century. They gave it a silicon balance spring. They managed to squeeze out 2 extra hours of power reserve. It has the coaxial escapement and it has the METAS certification, which makes it anti-magnetic and measures it to accuracy that's well beyond COSC. So they've definitely given this 1861 movement the upgrade it deserves, but it's still manual wind, it's still a lateral clutch chronograph. It looks similar on the surface and bears the same architecture, but Omega has crammed in all of their technology into it and really brought it into the 21st century. So I think it's a nice little homage to the past while also looking to the future. And I think that this caliber is something that we'll see in future Moonwatches. It'll trickle down, but for now it looks like they're keeping it to their special editions. But I think it's a great sign of things to come and where the Moonwatch is headed in the next 50 years. Now the other watch that they released was an all platinum version of the Moonwatch. It has meteorite subdials, but on the face of it, it just looks like a normal Moonwatch that they just changed the materials for. But on the inside is where they really made the change. And that's because they've actually brought back the Calibre 321. That's right, that's the pre-1861 movement, the one originally based on the Lemania 2310. And the great thing is they made it a part-for-part remake of the original. It's going to be a very limited production, not because it's a limited edition, but instead because they're only going to be producing apparently about 2,000 of these movements per year. But what I love about it is there's no reason to make this movement again. It's not particularly advanced. It's not something that the casual watchgoer will recognize. It's going to be made in a platinum watch, so you're going to be paying a ton for the watch, but it's all about the magic. And I think that's what the Speedmaster really is about. It's about the magic. It's about harking back to that time and getting that little piece of history. All 3 of these are a great celebration of a watch that has such amazing history and is one of the most important chronographs in the history of watches. Moving on, we have the 3 brands that are celebrating the first automatic chronograph. Now, the way that 3 brands can celebrate being first is very simple, and it's largely down to technicalities. We'll start with the one that definitely considers itself the first, and that is, of course, the Zenith El Primero. Now, regardless of who you think actually came first between the El Primero and the Tag Heuer Calibre 11 that I'll be talking about later, you can't deny, and it is the technicality that the El Primero does hold, is that it is the first integrated automatic chronograph. Meaning it was designed ground up to be a chronograph. It's all one cohesive unit as opposed to being a modular system, which I'll discuss later in the Calibre 11. But it still celebrates this milestone in chronograph making. And it's been basically the same movement ever since, and that's something definitely to be celebrated. And they've celebrated it in 2 great ways. First, using the standard El Primero 400 that's been in service for decades, they've released the A384 Revival, which is a direct homage to the original El Primero that was released in the late 60s, early 70s, that featured this movement that pretty much served as a jump-off point for what Zenith is today. Zenith has been holding on to the El Primero and using it in their marketing, using it as their USP for the majority of their modern history. So it's amazing that they've brought things back, they've released this new model, and it really is true to the original. And the best part is that it's not even a limited edition. So for all we know, this could be something that's kept in the collection, and I think it's great because it shows Zenith really pulling back to its history from a design standpoint instead of just the movement standpoint, which is what they've done lately. Now, the second watch that they've released is the complete opposite. It shows what the future of Zenith can be, and that is the El Primero Chronomaster 2. It's made in titanium, it's a limited edition of 250 pieces, but the big highlight is, of course, the movement. This is still a Zenith, and it features the El Primero 3600. This is their striking 10th movement, so it can actually measure a 1/10 of a second, and the subdials only measure minutes and seconds. So again, this shows us what the future is gonna be like. Made in titanium, ceramic bezel. It has an open work dial, which is very much of the present and the future for pretty much the major 3 LVMH brands, Zenith, Hublot, and Tag Heuer. And of course, it measures much faster speeds than the standard El Primero does. It really makes the most of that high beat rate. And it's something that's completely different. It looks crazy when you engage the chronograph because it moves around so fast. And also it's an evolution of their Chronomaster range, which has been sort of their traditional-ish range that holds the El Primero in it. So hopefully this is something that we'll see in a non-limited form in the next few months or years. It might show up in Basel, who knows? But I think it's a great reflection of what's to come. It's contemporarily sized. The open work dial looks really nice. I'm normally not someone who's too fond of skeletonized dials, but this is something I think is very well and tastefully executed. And I hope that it's the first of many good things to come. I loved the Zenith Defy, but that's obviously a much more modern design. It's completely different to what we're used to. If this is gonna be their new bread and butter El Primero watch, then I really, really hope that this is the direction that they take, that they expand on this range and keep the Chronomaster 2 as part of their regular production. Now moving on to the other movement that claims to be the first automatic chronograph, and that is the Heuer Calibre 11. So in 1969, a consortium of Heuer, Breitling, Buren, Dubois de Praz, they all collaborated to make the first automatic movement, and that was known as the Calibre 11. And that was released in the Heuer Monaco, what today is the Tag Heuer Monaco. And the logic behind it was that Jack Heuer wanted to release this new movement in something that was completely different. He really wanted to highlight this movement, so he decided he needed to have a new watch, a new case shape to really exemplify that this is something new in the beginning of a new era. Interestingly though, it didn't really change it that much in the time, because in the mid-70s they killed off the Monaco from poor sales, but they brought it back in the 90s as Tag Heuer realized that they could start capitalizing more and more on their heritage. So what they've done to celebrate this anniversary is they've released 5 different Monacos, each one with a different theme of a different decade. And I think that's really cool because it almost represents what the Monaco would have been had it not been discontinued. And on the inside, it features a Solida SW300, which is basically the same as an ETA 2892, and a Dubois de Praz module on top, which features that offset pusher configuration. So the module itself is different from the standard Dubois de Praz module because it has that different configuration. That's why it has a different model number. That's how it differs from what Tag Heuer normally calls the Calibre 12. And of these, my favorite is the 1979 to 1989 model. It's got a beautiful red dial. It's definitely something that's very, very of the 80s. The only way they could have made it more 80s is if they made it two-tone or full gold perhaps. But I really like it. And I think in general, this entire collection is a great way to represent the passage of time, different tastes. I think the 90s one also looks extremely 90s, so does the 2000s one. I think they really represented what those different faces of the Monaco would have been, especially in those decades where it was out of production. And then the other thing that they did this year is that they've also announced that this is going to be the end of the Calibre 11. And that's because going forward, they've introduced a new Monaco Calibre 02. And that features the Heuer Calibre 02 that we're used to seeing in the Octavia. So it's a fully in-house chronograph movement, column wheel chronograph with a vertical clutch. It has 80 hours power reserve. It's essentially what modern TAG Heuer is all about, and it is part of TAG Heuer's consolidation. Over the past few years, they've started putting in their in-house movements instead of using off-the-shelf ones. This is partly due to the changes in supply from ETA, and also partly in an effort, I think, to move a little bit further up market and really justify its position. TAG Heuer has normally played both sides of the fence between being accessible and being luxury. This, I think, is a clear sign they're trying to justify the luxury element of it and try and do whatever the opposite of cheapening their brand is, which is something that maybe happened in the 90s and early 2000s during those pre-LVMH and Jean-Claude Biver times. So I think it's a great way to push forward. And the amazing thing is they're not even charging that much more for the in-house movement. It's something like $100 more than what it was when it was the standard Calibre 11 or Calibre 12. So again, that shows that TAG Heuer is committed to improving the quality without necessarily having to bring the price up. More, they're just bringing up the value of their brand and their brand offers. And then the last watch on the list is Seiko. Now, Seiko is an interesting case because in the late 60s, Seiko wasn't really making a lot of noise about its first automatic chronograph. And because of that, it's often omitted from the conversation of who came first. Normally people are just saying, was it the El Primero, was it the Calibre 11? But meanwhile in Japan, Seiko was busy making its own automatic chronograph, and this year they've celebrated their first automatic chronograph, which was originally the Calibre 6139, and they've done that with the Seiko Prospex Anniversary Edition. This is an all stainless steel semi-panda layout, so it's got 2 black sub-dials and 1 regular silver colored dial, and it's a really handsome watch. On the back you can see the Calibre 8R48. They've included a sapphire case back, so I think that's a really good way to sort of highlight that they're celebrating essentially a watch caliber. Even though this doesn't really trace its roots back directly to the original 6139, it's still a nice homage. And it's a great way more than anything for Seiko to really take advantage of its history, to really start to highlight on a lot of those periods of time where perhaps in the watch world, Seiko was a little bit more niche, a little bit less known from a historical and a significant standpoint. Because in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, everyone was just thinking of Seiko as, you know, those cheap quartz watches that nearly killed the Swiss industry. But Seiko was still making advancements in mechanical watches, and this is something that's really important to highlight. And that's why I wanted to include it in this list, because often Seiko is left out of the discussion when people talk about the first automatic chronograph. But let me know in the comments below what you think of all the watches that I've discussed today. Let me know which one would be your favorite. Let me know which one you think is the most significant. And also, of course, let me know if there's any others that I left out or any others that you think were the great watches of 2019. And of course, if you like this video, please do like it and share it. If you want to see any of the infographics that I showed throughout this video, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shaluso. If you want to keep seeing new watch videos, make sure you subscribe to Shaluso as well. And of course, have an amazing new year, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in 2020.